Tell me about this, because now when you're an independent now.
Yeah.
So what does that say? That, to me, it says that you think the Republican Party is unsavable.
Unsavable. Oh, no doubt about it.
Because otherwise you would want to stay on, right, and reform it, but you think
it can't be saved.
It cannot be saved.
I've never argued with that. I've never argued that of a false equivalency. I just said there is misinformation from both sides.
Well,
no, I lived through COVID. Don't tell me there wasn't misinformation.
But there's a difference between...
I lived through stupid policies based on bad information and stifled information.
Things just got wild between Bill Maher and MSNBC's Joe Scarborough. Their late-night clash wasn't just a disagreement. It was a full-blown intellectual smackdown. Scarborough was backpedaling so fast you'd think he was auditioning for a moonwalk competition. It was awkward, it was tense, and it was impossible to look away. Bill Maher, never one to bite his tongue, went after Scarborough's bizarre take on Donald Trump like a hawk going after prey. He took Joe's comments and shredded them apart like a stack of fake headlines. The moment Scarborough realized he was losing the argument, he looked like someone who just remembered they left the stove on at home, desperate to get out of there fast. So what exactly set Maher off? What did Scarborough say that caused the whole thing to explode on live TV? Well, buckle in, because the tea is scalding hot. Scarborough started parroting one of the most extreme takes out there, saying Trump planned to use the military and National Guard to arrest his political rivals. Yes, arrest them. When asked if Trump would back off from such a plan, Scarborough said he didn't. He doubled down. He even brought up Trump calling Nancy Pelosi and her husband evil, and mentioned Schiff, too, claiming Trump talked about locking them up. And it didn't stop there. He accused Trump of saying he wanted to execute the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for being disloyal, and even quoted Trump saying to another general, "I wish my generals were like Hitler's generals."
Trump said that he was going to use the military and the National Guard to arrest his political opponents. He was asked if he would back off of that.
He said no.
And he said no. Yep. In fact, he doubled down. He talked about Nancy Pelosi being evil, her husband being evil, Schiff being evil, talking about arresting them. He said he was going to execute the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he was disloyal to him. He told another chief of staff who was a general, "I wish my generals were like Hitler's generals."
These claims were shocking, but also deeply manipulative. It was a perfect example of how some will twist every word Trump says to fit a terrifying narrative. This wasn't honest journalism. It was fear-mongering, and Maher was having none of it. As expected, Bill Maher didn't hold back. He lit into Scarborough's comments, exposing the clear bias behind them. Trump derangement syndrome was in full swing, and Maher called it out, loudly. Some people simply can't accept that Trump was president, and instead of moving on, they cling to every out-of-context quote to paint him as a monster. It's as if their only goal is to keep the Trump hate train running full speed, no matter the cost. Scarborough's take was more than just misleading. It was downright manipulative. He conveniently skipped over the context, ignored any nuance, and painted Trump as some cartoon villain plotting a dictatorship. It was storytelling, not reporting. And Maher knew it. He called it exactly what it was. A deliberate distortion of reality meant to stoke fear and outrage. What made it even more obvious was how Scarborough completely dismissed any wrongdoing by the left while amplifying every controversial Trump soundbite. This wasn't analysis. It was propaganda dressed up as commentary. And Maher went for the jugular, pointing out just how one-sided Scarborough's arguments really were. The clash kept escalating when Scarborough tried to act like he was being reasonable, saying, "There's disinformation from both sides." But Maher wasn't buying it. He shut that down fast, saying that false equivalency was a joke, and he meant it. The left had been caught spreading misinformation too, and acting like they were innocent just made things worse. Remember the Russian collusion hoax? The Hunter Biden laptop disinformation? Or the so-called fine people hoax? MSNBC and others amplified these narratives, only for them to collapse under scrutiny. But instead of taking responsibility, they doubled down or moved on like nothing happened. Maher reminded everyone that the left has been guilty of spreading misleading information for years, and they rarely pay the price for it. This was about more than just media bias. It was about truth and how it gets buried beneath political agendas. When Trump says something controversial, it's front-page news for days. But when someone on the left spreads lies, it's either ignored or quietly corrected with no real accountability. Maher was right. It's a double standard. And Scarborough? He had no real response. At one point, he even stumbled into bizarre insults, comparing Maher to Bret Stephens and Rachel Maddow, trying to play it off like a joke, but it just made him sound desperate. His arguments were falling apart, and everyone could see it. When Maher pointed out how the left censors real information, like what Mark Zuckerberg admitted about Facebook being forced to suppress true stories during the pandemic, Scarborough had no comeback. The facts were right there, and he had nothing.
No doubt.
There's no misinformation.
There's some disinformation from the left, but comparing it to what Donald Trump
No, of course,
spews
I
out
agree.
every day,
I
every
agree.
week, comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Bret Stephens
I
right now,
don't.
with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Or
You understand what I'm saying?
But I've never argued with that. I've never argued of a false equivalency. I just said there is misinformation from both sides.
Well,
no, I lived through COVID. Don't tell me there wasn't misinformation.
But there's a difference between...
I lived through stupid policies based on bad information and stifled information.
intent matters.
That's what Zuckerberg said. He said they were forcing us not to put out...
And then came the real mic drop moment, when Maher said the left is guilty of almost everything they accuse Trump of doing. That stung. Projection, hypocrisy, misinformation. It's all there. The media just chooses to look the other way. MSNBC has built a brand around sensationalizing every Trump story while brushing off their own blunders. The goal isn't truth, it's outrage. They need Trump to be the villain, because without him, they'd have nothing to talk about. That's why every statement he makes is turned into a crisis, while actual lies from their side are swept under the rug. And let's not forget the convenient editing. Cutting out key parts of Trump's words, ignoring his context, and presenting cherry-picked quotes designed to make him look like a madman. That's not journalism, it's manipulation. And it's dangerous. At this point, Maher turned the focus onto the broader issue, the culture war happening in plain sight. He described how he still considers himself a liberal, but not the kind of liberalism dominating the scene today. He made it clear. He's old school, not woke. He explained that the term woke started as something good, being alert to injustice. But now, it's been hijacked. It no longer means fighting for fairness. It means punishing anyone who doesn't toe the ideological line. And Maher wasn't afraid to say it. Here's where things really got interesting. Maher tried to separate himself from the extreme left by suggesting it's just a fringe group hijacking the message.
You haven't changed. So you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal. You have to make that distinction now because, you know, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of it the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
You know, stay woke. But I'm sorry, language is a living, breathing entity. Words change and they migrate and they take on a different meaning. And woke now has to answer for, or for people have just used the word to ascribe a number of extreme things on the left.
But that's where he might have missed the mark, because this fringe isn't fringe anymore. It is the left now. From politicians to celebrities to elite media outlets, the radical edge of the left has become the mainstream. Wokeness isn't an outlier. It's the dominant force shaping the Democratic Party. And Maher's attempt to downplay that reality didn't go unnoticed. Kamala Harris, for example, hasn't exactly distanced herself from the most extreme parts of her base. In fact, she's leaned right into it. The policies she supports, the speeches she gives, the people who rally around her. They all reflect a deep alignment with the woke agenda. Even Hollywood couldn't resist the glow-up of Harris's campaign. She was backed by A-listers, coddled by the media, and treated like royalty by pundits. Her connection to the woke movement isn't some subtle affiliation. It's front and center. So while Maher tried to argue that only a portion of the left has gone off the deep end, the evidence says otherwise. The extreme wing of the party is no longer whispering in back rooms. It's shouting from the podium. Scarborough couldn't argue that point because he knows it's true. And voters? They're seeing through the noise. Some support Trump not because they love everything he says, but because they see the left pushing ideas that seem totally disconnected from common sense. They see things like ads about sex changes in prison airing during football games, and it feels like reality is slipping away.
Kamala's big, I think, challenge here to win over the undecided voters is to convince them that she's not part of what they suspect she might be, sort of a stealth version of the worst excesses of the left. I said there's a coalition of Trump voters, people who really like him. They certainly are those. And then there's people who don't necessarily like him that much, but they still think he's less crazy than stuff that strikes them as aggressively anti-common sense. That takes place on the left. So that's why they keep running that ad about sex changes in prison. You know, like could you...
And every football game.
Could you get... Every
every football game.
Could you get more third rail words into one sentence?
And guess who's struggling the most to respond? Kamala Harris. She's so tightly connected to the woke agenda that she can't separate herself from it, even if she wanted to. That's the trap. And Scarborough? Still no answers, just silence and spin. Maher kept pressing, talking about the insanity of performative politics and the need for a return to balance. Common sense governance shouldn't be controversial, but in this environment, even basic truths are seen as threats. And that's the real crisis.
I lived through COVID. Don't tell me there wasn't misinformation.
But there's a difference between...
I lived through stupid policies based on bad information and stifled information.
But intent matters.
That's what Zuckerberg said. He said they were forcing us not to put out...
Maher wasn't done. He leaned in even harder, pointing out how this obsession with ideology over practicality is dragging the country down. Policies meant to level the playing field are now backfiring in ways that nobody wants to admit. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives might sound noble on paper, but in practice, they've created a minefield of unintended consequences. Jobs lost, standards lowered, public safety risked, all because leaders are more focused on appearances than actual outcomes.
On the one hand, understand you benefited from racism if you're white. There's no doubt about it. And that has to be addressed. It can't be ignored. But also, I didn't personally do it. There's a middle ground there. It's very difficult.
Two things can be true at one time.
And they are both true at one time. I'm not personally responsible, but did I benefit? Yes, I'm sure I did. People our age definitely did. And so, if we can all agree on things like that, we could then come up with sensible policies.
When ideology is allowed to steamroll over logic, everyone pays the price. And Maher knew that too well. Instead of real solutions to real problems, we get empty gestures. Instead of common sense reforms, we get slogans. Instead of unity, we get division. And why? Because admitting the flaws in these ideas would mean giving ground to people they've spent years vilifying. Racism, for example, is still a serious issue. But to act like nothing's changed since the civil rights movement is not just wrong, it's destructive. Maher said it straight. Two things can be true at once. Yes, systemic racism has existed, and yes, progress has been made. But saying that out loud? That's now seen as heresy on the left.
On the left, they don't want to acknowledge progress because it interferes with virtue signaling. To say, we've come a long way, which we have.
It's okay to say that.
It's okay to say it, but somehow you're a better person if you say, but there's work to be done. Of course there's work to be done. There's always work to be done. We're humans. We're on Earth. There's always going to be work to be done, but let's be realistic.
This is where things get even more twisted, because for some people, progress is actually bad news. Why? Because their careers, influence, and platforms are built on the idea that things are worse than ever. That's the real scandal. If society starts acknowledging improvement, race hustlers and outrage peddlers lose their grip. People like Whoopi Goldberg, Sonny Hostin, and Don Lemon, who've built brands around grievance, suddenly look obsolete if things are getting better. That's why they keep stirring the pot, even when it's empty. The more progress we make, the louder the narrative of oppression gets. Because for these personalities, the outrage isn't about justice, it's about job security. If Americans start uniting and seeing eye to eye, the ratings drop and the donations dry up. That's the dirty secret nobody wants to say out loud. But Maher hinted at it, and it was impossible to ignore.
Tell me about this, because now when you're an independent now.
Yeah.
So what does that say? That, to me, it says that you think the Republican Party is unsavable.
Unsavable. Oh, no doubt about it.
Because otherwise you would want to stay on, right, and reform it, but you think
it can't be saved.
It cannot be saved.
Meanwhile, Trump supporters are still hanging on, and some aren't even diehard fans. They're just people who feel like the alternative is worse.
I've seen focus groups over the past couple of days of Trump voters who still would support him, who say things like, I like Donald Trump because of where he stands. I can't even say it with a straight face. On the issues. Now you tell me, what the fuck does that mean? What does he, what issues? What issues does this guy share with conservatives?
These voters may not love Trump's personality, but they're fed up with a left that seems aggressively anti-reason. And you can see it play out everywhere, from politics to culture to education. Whether it's school boards being hijacked by radical ideology or institutions redefining basic truths, people are tired of the nonsense. They're craving a voice that pushes back. So when someone asks, what issues does Trump even stand for? It's almost laughable. Trump has been consistent on core conservative values, protecting women's sports, affirming biological gender, safeguarding parental rights, and restoring order at the border. He's also tackled corruption and mismanagement head-on, cutting waste, calling out broken institutions, and defending taxpayer money. You don't have to like him to recognize that he's at least doing something, while others just talk in circles. And for Scarborough to pretend those issues don't matter? That's exactly the kind of elitist attitude that's pushed so many voters into Trump's corner. People aren't stupid. They know when they're being talked down to. They know when the media is gaslighting them. Even independents are waking up. When Maher was asked what it meant to now be an independent, the answer was clear. He no longer believed the Republican Party could be saved. But at least he admitted it's the Trump-led Republicans who are actually winning. Trump didn't just squeak by, he crushed his rivals. He didn't just win votes, he reignited a movement. The America First agenda didn't disappear. It exploded back onto the scene with force. And Scarborough? He looked like he just realized the old playbook doesn't work anymore.
No doubt.
There's no misinformation.
There's some disinformation from the left, but comparing it to what Donald Trump spews out every day, every week, comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real-time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow.
You understand what I'm saying?
I've never argued with that. I've never argued of a false equivalency. I just said there is misinformation from both sides. No, I lived through COVID. Don't tell me there wasn't misinformation.
But there's a difference between...
I lived through stupid policies based on bad information and stifled information. That's what Zuckerberg said. He said they were forcing us not to put out...
This wasn't just another political comeback. It was a reckoning. The people had spoken. And they were done with the polished sound bites, the failed policies, and the phony performances. They wanted results, and they made it loud and clear. Maher's final point drove it all home. If we don't bring this country back to a place of balance and rational thinking, the chaos will only get worse. The divide isn't just political, it's cultural, spiritual, even existential. And it's growing every day.
You haven't changed. So you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal.
Old school liberal.
You have to make that distinction now because, you know, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of it the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
You know, stay woke. But I'm sorry, language is a living, breathing entity. Words change and they migrate and they take on a different meaning. And woke now has to answer for, or for people have just used the word to ascribe a number of extreme things on the left.
But here's where things get truly controversial. Because at the core of all this chaos is one painful truth no one wants to admit. The left needs Trump more than they hate him. That's right. For all their outrage, for all their fear-mongering, for all their pearl-clutching at every word he says, Donald Trump is their golden ticket. Their ratings rocket when he's on screen. Their narratives collapse without him. Their outrage machine only runs if he's the villain. Imagine for a moment if Trump disappeared from public life. What would MSNBC do? Who would they blame? What would Whoopi rant about on The View? What would Rachel Maddow cry over next? Their entire existence is tied to keeping Trump alive in the public imagination. As a monster, a threat, a symbol of everything wrong with America. But if Trump's gone, they lose their villain. And if they lose their villain, they have to face the mirror. And that's what they fear the most. Because the real scandal isn't what Trump did or didn't do. It's what his enemies became while opposing him. They became the very thing they claim to hate. Corrupt, dishonest, power-hungry, and disconnected from the everyday people they pretend to care about. And Bill Maher? He just exposed the whole charade on national TV. So whether you love Trump, hate him, or fall somewhere in between, one thing is crystal clear. This fight isn't about policy anymore. It's about power, control, and the truth people are too scared to face. Trump might be controversial. He might say wild things. But maybe, just maybe, he's not the only one we should be worried about. And that's the real bombshell. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, so hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And please make sure to check out these other videos you might like. See you guys in the next video. Till then, take care and goodbye.